When one encounters the waste dumps around Cape Town, especially the one at they call False Bay Park, one is kind of shocked by the amount of desperation that's kind of surrounds these places. I mean, for one, we encountered the people with extreme poverty trying to extract materials that have some kind of value when recycled. So different levels of activity at the dump, with people trying to find scrap metal and to pull out all sorts of kind of slightly valuable aspects of the garbage. So there's an oversight there that we really need to find better ways of recycling. The actual choice of the landfill site is really questionable. It's basically built right on top of one of the most important wetland areas. I mean, the whole of False Bay in the old days used to be part of an extension of the Cape Flats, and that area used to be a huge dune system, and it's all sand, and everything that's kind of dumped on top of that sand eventually does filter down through the sand into the water table, and that seepage then does also contaminate the surrounding areas quite seriously. We've got farms in the Philippi area that are also now affected by this groundwater, which is now percolated through all this waste. So, I mean, one looks at this scenario and thinks, are there not better ways for us to deal with waste disposal and treatment of pollutants that are just discarded? Now, the sea is a very special space. It's a place where we can move away from land and be disconnected from our everyday life. But it is as a body, it is a finely tuned, balanced environment, which unfortunately has been very compromised recently. But for me, it's a wilderness. It's a place to escape and to kind of find a way to kind of regenerate one's energy. And I think everybody that uses the sea, be you a person on a surfboard who enjoys the wave and enjoys the energy that brings, or someone who goes below the water and enjoys the aquatic world of organisms that live in a different realm, to the person who uses the sea for recreational purposes, and also to maybe go out there and find some good food. But it's all about balance, and it's about respect. If you're a person who uses the sea for fishing purposes and you extract fish or shellfish from the ocean, it's all about taking what you need and being respectful of the resource and not exploiting it beyond what it needs to be. And it's been quite a revelation to see that there are quite a few people that start to see the ocean as a resource, as something which is owned by all, that is not just something which is controlled by governments and exploited by few. And I think this is the only way that we're going to find a solution to deal with this massive exploitation, is for the people to take ownership and realize that this resource is part of their legacy, and they need to find ways of protecting it. It's an asset. So when the government issues contracts to folk that exploit the resource, we as the public need to be the ones that intervene and get involved and fight for our own interests, because it's not just the interest of the government. And unfortunately, it's become a case in South Africa where all the major resources have now been pushed out on a kind of a quota basis to a select few. And we should question why they use rock lobster traps that are a funnel-based system, which, when lost at sea, just drifts around and rolls along the ocean floor, and all the organisms that are attracted by what's inside the trap move through the funnel and get caught up in this trap of death. And those lobster traps, which are quite big cages, are responsible for killing not only probably about 100 times the lobsters they would usually catch, and completely wasted within the cage, but also fish and all sorts of other organisms. So we should get the industry to relook the methods of capture. As a people, we need to take control and question the methods of exploitation, the different catching methods, which ones are harmful, which ones are maybe a little bit more targeted in terms of what they're trying to catch. Some examples that we've encountered out on these oceans is how non-target some of the fishing practices are, and how many species are actually affected by them. I mean, one can't help to notice when the longliners are pulling up their lines, all the numbers of sharks and turtles and non-target animals that are affected, as are seabirds, and quite a number of the pelagic seabirds, the giant albatrosses and petrels and all these very special birds that live out on the wing there, are impaled on the hooks and get severely injured and don't recover. So a number of birds are also affected as you could say, it's like a bycatch, unfortunately. Other things that we need to deal with is the fact that there's huge numbers of fish that we don't realize are affected, are the ones that get impaled and caught on long liners that are lost at sea. I mean, these hooks, long ropes of hooks are kind of maybe shear off at the boat and then just get dropped into the ocean. I spoke about the traps. The other thing to realize is that there are scientific programs to try and establish the total allowed catch for certain kind of species, but the methods of survey are not really accurate. Just to get some idea of how much fishing material is lost at sea, you just got to do a walk along the coastline in Cape Point Reserve after a winter storm. I mean, in a distance of about 5 kilometers, I counted about 40 lobster traps. Huge portions of seine netting. There's the fine pelagic net. There's long piece coils of line with hooks on, long liners, obviously lost at sea. We'll give you a little glimpse of what's actually happening out at sea. Never mind the amount of net and that's floating around there that's on the ocean floor that will never find its way to the coast. Other things that we need to realize is that the scenario in South Africa is that there's certain fish species that we kind of taken for granted as being a fish that's always going to be around. I mean, what we call the geelbek or the Cape salmon, and the cob, which there are many like subspecies of cob. They all very much rely on estuaries and some sheltered bays for breeding, but they have been so severely targeted as well by recreational fishermen that take fish at the prime breeding stage, and the kind of policy now is to rather say, well, look, if you do catch a really large fish, it's not good to eat. The meat value in terms of the amount of contamination that it's accumulated, like the heavy metals, will compromise your health. So rather release that fish and allow it to breed and rather look at harvesting fish that are like, just intermediate stage, not the very young, but the intermediate one. So there's the way that they are now achieving that is by allowing fishermen to catch one small one and one big one, but there should be, rather than a size limit, there should be an interim limit, if they could kind of create a better system for dealing with that. According to the scientific research, any species whose population is less than 10% of what it originally was before it became exploited, if it reaches that point, they call it a population collapse. And there are quite a number of fish, reef fish and estuarine fish around South Africa that are way below that point. We're quite fortunate in South Africa is that there are moves to try and create these conservation areas or these protected areas, and the main idea is to establish up to 20% of the coastline as marine protected areas. We haven't quite got there yet, but there is in place quite a few worthwhile sanctuaries that are able to protect some of these very rare reef fish. Pelagic fish are yet another story, because they move and are very dependent on the currents and the wind conditions, and from one year to the next it's very difficult to establish what the population of pelagics are going to be. And I guess one of the most recognizable concentrations of pelagic fish is the annual sardine run, where all these shoals of sardines and anchovies accumulate off and pilchards, sardines, anchovies assemble off the wild coast, and there one gets a glimpse of how rich the ocean can be. So there are some other initiatives that, apart from these marine protected areas, there's a Marine Stewardship Council, which is an organization that is now looking at what they call an eco-label to kind of promote sustainable fish species. And I think that's an international move now, to try and get that kind of common rated across the world, because of the amount of fish that gets shipped through the back door versus through the proper mechanisms. So the consumer out there is able to now become the watchdog, person to decide whether the resource that they're about to consume is actually caught in a aesthetically kind of acceptable method, or whether there is this backdoor poaching and illicit kind of trade that's causing quite a bit of the severe impact on the resource. So we really appeal to everybody out there that enjoys seafood to assist conservation and assist the resources to survival by questioning the origin of the food you're about to eat, and make sure that the restaurateur, who the provider of the food, is following the correct procedures. Now there's so much illicit trade that goes on. This is one of my questions about the so-called total allowed catch, or the scientific kind of recommended bag limits. They obviously don't take into account the amount of black market dealings that go on. Many of these big factory ships discharge quite a bit of their catch to other traders out at sea, and that catch often doesn't reach our ports, and there's no proper method of monitoring the actual volumes that are harvested. One also would question the methodology of total allowed catch, because of all the bycatch that actually also gets taken in a net and then discarded at sea, because it's sometimes illegal to land with certain species. But those fish have been trawled in a net and would have been crushed and injured in a way that they would never survive if discarded. So there once again is that constant wastage. And the amount of bycatch to produce a portion of prawns on a plate is about 10 kilograms of other non-target species that just happen to be in the same net. And because the prawns are the priority, or the value of that specific activity, the rest gets discarded. So there's huge wastage that goes on. So methodology of fishing needs to be readdressed, and then it's up to everybody out there to be the ones to help us be on the lookout. And people need to actively now engage and get involved. When you look out over the ocean and you see that great expanse, it's not something that belongs to another space. It's part of your environment. It belongs. It affects our weather. It affects our moods. It affects our days. It's so much linked to the earth. And just to think that it's another area that outside of our normal lives is wrong. We really need to take an interest and get involved there, and make sure that the balance that we try and maintain on land is mirrored and balanced out in the ocean as well. So at the moment we're faced with a situation that there are individuals and companies transgressing and exploiting our resource, something that belongs to us. And we expect someone to be in the law enforcement division to go and apprehend them and to charge them, and then we do expect someone then to convert that into some form of punishment and some way of preventing them from continuing the way they are. And unfortunately this whole mechanism is not very well structured. We don't have the vessels, we don't have the resources, we don't have the people out there to deal with this. And I think once again we've got a situation where we're relying on the government or the officials to be to apprehend the offenders. But it's actually wrong, because it's not about the government, it's about us standing up and us fighting for that, and us singling out the perpetrators and making them aware of the fact that we all are aware of their activity and what they're doing, and use other pressures to try and regulate them, because the system of law enforcement is a bit flawed. It's not always certain that one is going to find the right recourse for an offence. These days it's very easy for big organizations with money to find their way out of any legal situation. So it must be public pressure. We need to use every method available in terms of social media and our new technology to expose perpetrators, and to stop supporting them, and try and lobby for government to change policies and make them far more strict, that the certain methods of capture are criminalized, and that if anybody who has a quota and is able to exploit the resource, if they transgress the acceptable methods, then they need to lose their permit. It shouldn't be something that is regarded as a right. It should be a privilege that they are awarded for respect of the resource, for looking at as a sustainable method of fishing. And I think that's the way we need to turn it around. We can't just rely on the law enforcement division, but we need to use public participation. We need people to be aware. We need everybody to become more observant and a little bit more interested. Otherwise, if we just allow it to go the way it is, we're just about to lose one of the world's biggest ecosystems and all the ingredients that are part of that web of life.